Hello, and welcome to our next edition of Spotlight on Security. My name is Ross Camp, and I lead corporate communications here at Cohesity. I will be your host today, and we are so glad that you're joining us. The Spotlight series is designed to cover a diverse range of topics that have one common denominator: security. We want today's session to be as interactive as possible, so please engage with us through our polls, via the chat, and in our Q&A module. And with respect to Q&A, please submit your questions at any time, and we will do our best to answer those live during the broadcast. Today's episode focuses on a red-hot topic: the AI wave that we're seeing today. We'll look at the risks, rewards, and of course, the realities of AI. And we have a fantastic lineup today. In our first segment, Daniel Newman, CEO and Chief Analyst of the Futurum Group, will be talking to Dimitri Sirota, CEO and co-founder of BigID, a leader in data security, privacy, compliance, and governance. I'm super excited about this conversation. Dimitri is a privacy and identity expert, and Daniel is a 7-time best-selling author who recently wrote Human Machine: The Future of Our Partnerships with Machines, which sounds very appropriate for today's discussion. Daniel and Dimitri will discuss AI for cyber resilience. Then we've invited Michael Smith, the Chief Information Security Officer at HKS, an international architecture firm based in Dallas. We'll get Michael's perspectives on the realities of AI, including some things that enterprises might want to consider doing as they look to deploy AI within their organizations. And finally, Cohesity Chief Solutions Officer Matt Waxman will join Michael Smith and I for more of a free-flowing conversation on all things AI related, and we will answer your questions live. But first, let's explore AI for cyber resilience. And for that, I'd like to introduce Daniel Newman, CEO of the Futurum Group, and Dimitri Sirota, CEO and co-founder of BigID. Welcome to Spotlight, gentlemen.
Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks, Ross.
Daniel, you've been at the forefront of generative AI conversations and how organizations will be able to leverage generative AI using data and enterprise applications. And Dimitri, as CEO of BigID, your organization is giving companies the power to unlock the full potential of their data environments, whether you're a CISO looking to secure your organization's data or a data analyst searching for better data insights. It would be great for our organization to hear more on the risks and rewards you're seeing with generative AI as it relates to cyber resilience. And Daniel, I think for that, I'm going to turn it over to you as the host for this next segment.
Thank you, Ross. Dimitri, it's great to be here with you.
Good to meet you, Daniel.
You know, in my career, over 2 decades in the technology industry, 7 books, thousands of research reports, endless analysis, I don't think I've ever seen a trend onset to the market the way generative AI has. Last year at Thanksgiving, no one spoke of generative AI. By now, it's really all we talk about. And it doesn't matter what part of the technology industry you're in. You could be in the cloud, you could be in software and apps, you could be in different parts of infrastructure, semiconductors. Every day, no matter which tech company or which tech customers or users I'm speaking to, this is the top thing on their mind. Having said that, one of the big areas is as we begin to utilize generative AI, security has to become a big focus, not just security through the lens of cyber, but also privacy, compliance, governance. We've got so much responsibility as companies and enterprises that are either suggesting and advising on how to utilize these technologies or actually providing these technologies. So Dimitri, what I'd love for you to start with is talking a little bit about what you're seeing at BigID, and maybe a little background on BigID, but also the challenges that your customers are bringing to you as this generative AI trend comes to bear and they're figuring out how to implement it into their business.
Sure. So, I think one thing we've certainly seen since our inception back in kind of late 2016, is that kind of data has increasingly become kind of the lifeblood of business, right? The digital enterprise is built around the currency or I guess blood of data. The challenge with data is data has a couple of dimensions. It has, as you talked about earlier, kind of a reward dimension. It has value that it represents. And that value is based on how it can help your analytics, or in the, what we're talking about here, kind of your conversational AI models. It also represents risk, right? It represents sometimes regulatory risk. And there's many regulations from GDPR and privacy to GLBA and financial services, to HIPAA and healthcare, to PCI and payment card, to ITAR and export control. There's lots and lots of data regulations. And then there's security regulations, right? You're always worried about insiders, employees that may have excessive privileges to get access to the data. You're worried about outsiders, maybe companies you work with from a supply chain standpoint that may have too much access or unnecessary access. And so how do you deal with all of this, especially when you're talking about a new kind of data AI, right? So traditionally, when people talked about and companies thought about kind of how do I govern my data that feeds my AI models, they really kind of built upon this notion that AI looks a lot like analytics, right? And analytics is based on things that are in databases. Now that can be kind of a Snowflake type data warehouse database. It can be kind of a SQL database. And along comes conversational AI over the last, like you said, 9 months, where instead of looking at things that have kind of like table-like structures, it uses documents, right? It's basically building kind of a model based on how words kind of collaborate. And on the one hand, you want to kind of just give it everything, right? I want to do like, what we called back in high school refrigerator soup. I just want to give it everything out of the refrigerator, and it's going to become super smart. My large language model will know everything. The problem is you can't give it everything, right? You have highly sensitive information. Maybe you have trade secrets. Maybe you have employee records that contain things like health information, maybe social security numbers. Maybe you have contracts that you don't just want to give this third-party company, OpenAI, information. And so one of the challenges with the ushering in of OpenAI and ChatGPT and other conversational AI LLMs is how do I govern the data that goes in, right? I can't just put everything I have in the refrigerator, right? Only some things could be used as input. And even for those things, I need to know if there's anything particularly sensitive that I need to tokenize, I need to encrypt, I need to redact. And so what BigID has always kind of talked about is, hey, you need to know the entirety of your data estate. You need to know it from a crown jewel standpoint. Where's the value? Where's the risk? And that has only become exacerbated or become kind of elevated in the era of conversational AI, where you have this new type of data model, unstructured, documents and things of that sort. Then you've got to have an intimate understanding of what's there so that you can both govern it and you can control what is sent over to your LLM.
Yeah, I think you brought up some really good points. One is, while we think we know what's in a lot of our data, we don't. And the more we've moved to unstructured, you think about things like meetings, right? A company meeting, and you're going, we're going to take this whole meeting and dump this in intelligence, but you don't realize that, there were some very confidential things said in that meeting, and you don't really remember it. You didn't record it. You didn't necessarily have the chance to transcribe and pull it out, and the ability to quickly discern, like, how do we get the stuff that's valuable in with and keep the stuff that's got sensitivity out? And that's a very big thing, especially because we're not looking to utilize and deploy these at a slow pace, Dimitri. Everybody wants to basically, like you said, kind of bulk. Hey, let me take all my files and I'm going to just press the train button. And that's kind of the story that we're telling, is we're democratizing, we're moving to this kind of low code, no code approach to generative AI. You're seeing generative AI app builders being created. You're seeing co-pilots being delivered that basically are democratizing this and saying any company that wants to use this can. And we're also telling a story that's saying any company that wants to get value out of this has to really start to look at how to put their proprietary high value customer data and internal data alongside this sort of open internet LLM model. Well, all of a sudden, what you've done is you've created this massive portfolio of risk. And you've created risk because you have customer data. You've created risk because you have transaction data, security data. And of course, like you said, if you want to go fast, you may not understand how to also do it safely. So that's what I'd love to kind of, have you cover a little bit is we know the pressure right now is to go fast. The pressure is let's move everything to prompt-based, whether it's the CEO dashboard or it's the contact center. Let's just roll this out as fast as we can. Let's slow the churn. Let's improve customer satisfaction. But in order to do this, it's all about basically giving our data to these systems. And all the companies are saying we're keeping the left hand and the right hand not talking. But as companies, we have to have them talk, Dimitri. If they don't talk, these systems don't actually add value. So how are you basically suggesting to companies to utilize this technology to add value quickly without creating all this risk that we agree upon?
Yeah, so I think it begins with this kind of notion of knowing your data, right? You need to know what's in it. You need to know what's valuable about it. You need to know what's risky about it, whether it's regulatory risk or security risk. It all starts with knowing your data, right? Because at the end of the day, your data is not a Klingon warbird. It's not invisible, right? It doesn't have a cloaking device. It's there. And what organizations historically have not done and have started embarking on, even pre-conversational AI, is really getting their arms, getting that situational awareness around their data, around, again, where the value is, where the risk is. And doing that across not just structured, but unstructured, things that are kind of in between, semi-structured. And the reason for that is manifold, right? It's not just conversational AI, right? If you think about privacy regulations like GDPR, you got to figure out what data do I have that has Dimitri's information. So I better look across everywhere and have an understanding of where do I find artifacts that belong to Dimitri. If I care about ITAR, export control, I care about schematics for missiles and planes, and I need to know where that is. If I care about healthcare, I need to know where my health records are. I need to know where my health IDs are. And so you could see the necessity of knowing your data. And if you know your data, you can start applying ways of governing it, right? You can start labeling it or tagging it. Then you could start layering in things like redaction, encryption, tokenization, minimization in terms of reducing it. But I would say you start at the beginning. You start by finding a way to know your data, to look across your data estate, structured, the things that we cared about when we were doing analytics, but also unstructured, the things that we care about for conversational AI and ChatGPT and all that kind of thing. And then once we know it, we could, again, describe it. We could index it, make it findable and searchable. And then we could layer on the security around it that we need. And now you have a complete, totally controlled data environment.
It's interesting, Dimitri, because, over the last 7 months, I've been there for the launches of some of the biggest moments in AI, from the initial OpenAI announcements with Microsoft to some of the others. And we use the word, regulation, governance, quite a bit. But I think what a lot of people missed is it's not just about model drift. It's about the fact that we are really moving to a rapid onset of the utilization of our unstructured data sets. And companies have tons of it. In order to build what I would call kind of an enterprise search or something along that, there's not been enough talk about how are we making sure that what we're submitting to these models to be trained has been cleansed. And I'm just telling you, this is a very interesting and thought-provoking conversation. Now, we have just a couple minutes left, and I do want to ask you about this because clearly you and I are both in agreement that the generative AI trend is legitimate. This is not the metaverse. This is moving forward. Not to say the metaverse won't eventually. Maybe Apple's recent announcement actually helped that a little bit, but this isn't something. There might be peak hype, but this is going forward. Every business is going to be layering in AI, automation, workflows. And by the way, AI is not new, everybody. It's not a new thing. It's generative is sort of democratized and given us all this use case. But Dimitri, how do you kind of weigh the hype versus reality of how quickly should companies be moving? Like, you know, I talked to some people that are like, we're going very slowly for security reasons, or just because they're not fully bought in. I also talk to people that's like, we're dumping everything in. We're going 100%, 100 miles an hour. We're cutting staff. We're upping. And like, how are you sort of thinking about this as in terms of advising your clients and moving forward?
Yeah, look, I'm going to actually use ourselves as an example. So everything I've talked to earlier is really about how we help organizations make sense of their assets, their data assets, right? To understand where the value, where the risk, and basically be able to govern it accordingly so they can make more informed decisions of what they want to use in their generative AI or any analytics. So that's what we do as a business. We help them basically make sense of their data, just like CMDB helps you with your IT assets, we help you with your data assets. Having said that, we are also a company, right? And we also want to use generative AI. In our core business, we've always used graph AI and deep learning and natural language processing. And now we similarly want to embark on creating a copilot. And in fact, we have a preview already built and generated. We're probably going to be launching it in early August, where we're previewing it with customers. And the idea there is that normally you would have an analyst or somebody that reviews what BigID does as a product and then kind of validates it. So we automate a lot of the activities, but you still have a human. Well, now you can have a copilot built on generative AI that basically does that validation for you and probably makes a lot smarter insights as well. So we ourselves are a company, and I think the recommendation advice I give is that, of course, you have to embark on it, right? It's not going to go back. We're not going back into abacuses and whatever rocks and whatever else we used, cuneiforms. This is going to be a core way we conduct business. And I think every business is going to want to be able to do it, but they're going to want to be able to do it responsibly, right? And that's, I think, where you're going to need to think through not only on the security of the models, especially if they move towards open source LLMs, but just more generally in terms of the data that they use to input into these models. And that's where products like BigID, in partnership even with Cohesity, can help.
Yeah, I think you brought a really great point. It's a good way to sort of summate everything here, Dimitri. One of my big takeaways as an analyst was, as much as I've been thinking about things like model hallucination, what I hadn't actually spoken to the market enough about is just how important it is to actually get your data right first, which, by the way, is really 101 of big data for as long as it's existed. But generative AI has really forced enterprises to say, look, there's real risk if you do not have your data cleansed and cared for prior to using it for training. And I also would say that, to your point, the Futurum Group, we have deployed Futurum AI. We've built a generative AI analyst. We are, just like you, believe that knowledge bases can be created in any business, and that every company needs to think about how these technologies can be utilized. Now, having said that, we do tons of proprietary research. We have tons of insights that we have from talking to customers under NDA. So for the same reason as you, this entire practice for us has been all about how do we make sure the data that we make available is only the data we want to be trained and seen by the audience, which could vary depending on different multi-tenancies as to what level people should get access. So you brought some really great points here, Dimitri. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation. Congratulations on the success of BigID, and thanks for spending some time here with me today.
My pleasure. Thank you, Daniel.
All right, Ross, handing it back to you.
All right. And I would like to thank both Daniel and Dimitri for joining us today on Spotlight. Dimitri, could not agree more with your comments on the critical need to find and know your data. Really great to have both of you today on Spotlight. And Daniel, congratulations to you and your team for a really successful 6.5 Summit. If our viewers haven't had a chance to check out some of that great content this week, go check it out. Great stuff. And thank you again, both of you, for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks, Ross. Thanks, Daniel. Take care.
All right. Take care. All right. So many great takeaways from that discussion. A few that I jotted down. Number one, conversational AI is creating all new opportunities to get value from data, but proper and modern data security and compliance is key. Number two, traditional approaches to data governance may not be sufficient when it comes to generative AI. And number three, large language models are great, but you have to think about the data that you're giving to these large language models, which means that you need to, again, know and understand your data. Well, this leads us directly to our poll. And let's flash up the question. What is your comfort level with letting employees use generative AI within your organization? Again, what's your comfort level with employees using generative AI within your organization? And the answers that we've got run the gamut. I'm sure the employees, know what's appropriate. We used ChatGPT to write our AI policy, okay? AI employee training has happened or will happen in the next 30 days. We're fine with employees using AI only in use cases where the outcome doesn't result in chaos. And then last but not least, we're still figuring out what our comfort level is with AI. And honestly, no surprise, it looks like that fifth response, we're still figuring out what our comfort level is with AI, is by far the dominant response, which is, I think, symbolic of what many organizations are facing today. Some really interesting findings there. Thank you for participating. Please keep it up. And speaking of keeping it up with participation, I'd like to remind the audience that if you've got questions, put them in the comments or in the Q&A module, and we will do our best to get to them live in the broadcast. All right, on to our next segment. As many of you know, our Spotlight series strives to provide you with a perspective from your security and IT peers on relevant topics and areas of focus. And that's why I'm very excited to introduce our next guest. Michael Smith is Chief Information Security Officer at HKS, an architecture firm in Dallas. He's also an experienced leader in technology and cybersecurity operations, and he's someone I've turned to multiple times over the last couple of years for insights. Michael, great to see you again, and welcome to Spotlight.
Yeah, Ross, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure always to chat with you, and excited to talk about such an exciting topic today.
Fantastic. Well, let's dive right in. So, Michael, as you know, there is so much discussion, or let's just call it what it is, in some cases, hype around AI. Some say it's great. Others say that, in security and IT, hey, I've got some pretty significant concerns, including around compliance. So my first question is, where do you fall in the spectrum?
Yeah, so that's a great intro, and I think Daniel and Dimitri both had some really great things to say about that. Dimitri specifically talked about developing a situational awareness of your data, right? And data, we've known for a long time that data is king, right? And I think Daniel talked about a lot of the hype, right? Is that we've heard more about generative AI in the last 3 months than we've heard about AI in the last, looking at my calendar here, it's been around for 70 years, right? 1952, the first, computer was taught to learn and play a game of checkers, right? So, and I think what we really need to understand is you take that middle ground, right? Is that, I'm not gonna buy into the doom and gloom. I'm gonna listen to it, right? Because I have to be, again, situationally aware of what's going on. But I'm also gonna look at the risks. I'm gonna look at the rewards. I'm gonna look, what if I don't do anything as my company, right? What if I just sit on my hands or put my head in the sand and we don't explore the possibilities, right? Is what advantages are we competitive advantages, right? The ability, one of our things at HKS is even from an IT perspective, is we're taught to be influential. We are meant to be influential within the industries that we represent, right? And so that means design as architects, right? But it means technology. It means cybersecurity, and it certainly means artificial intelligence. So, I think people just need to understand that you've got, the field of AI, right? And then you've got, within that, you've got deep learning, you've got machine learning, right? Which is far more prevalent. And then you've got this tiny little group over here that's generative AI. But that little group is on everybody's phone right now. and it's what everybody's playing with, right? And so that's where you've got this socialization, you've got this almost this commoditization of it, right? And so I think just we as technologists, we got to take a step back again and just survey the entire landscape, and as a community decide kind of where we're going to go in a responsible fashion.
Yeah, it makes complete sense. I mean, there's enormous opportunity, but if I'm summarizing, you really need to look at AI with your eyes wide open from all of the different security and compliance angles as well. And I think kind of tied to that, Michael, is something that I think is really interesting that your company is doing. You've developed a committee that is looking at the pros and cons of utilizing AI in your organization. And I'd love to hear more about that in terms of what types of things the committee is looking at, the types of roles that are on the committee, anything that you can say about that.
Yeah, most definitely. So again, I've been really pleased to see, because I mean, this has kind of happened organically, right? But I mean, leaders in the different fields have kind of got together to say, hey, look, we really have to put some bumpers around this, right? Not even boundaries, right? Because I work for a design firm, and so one of the keys to design is just having unfettered access to being able to develop intellectual property. And I think but some of the things we talk about, right? So we talk about when we start, the education piece of this, the literacy piece, right? Being able to actually have a conversation about this and not go straight to generative AI or chat GPT 3 or 4, etc., but being able to actually speak as a subject matter expert. How is this going to incorporate our design process workflows, right? How is this going to aid in design? How does it affect intellectual property, right? That's a huge one. Not only what intellectual property are you referencing in the design process, but once you input your intellectual property into, say, an LLM, what happens to that, right? Whose does that become, right? I mean, it just goes off in the ether, and but yeah, so we've got a group together. There's about 8 to 10 individuals. So it's everything from our chief technology officer, so folks that are very influential in the design process. I'll tell you, so we actually have hired an AI design research lead, specifically named position, and 40 hours a week, 24/7, dedicated to, in essence, to help us to kind of ferret that forward. So, and we're a design firm, right? I mean, we're not an AI firm, we're not a technology firm, but we have a named AI design researcher to help us on that journey.
Really interesting. Sounds like a very much of a cross-functional effort. Completely also understand what you're talking about in terms of protecting your IP, especially in your line of work with architecture. That makes complete sense. Pivoting a little bit on another topic pertaining to AI around control. We heard Dimitri and Daniel talking a little bit about that, but how important is it for you to have control when it comes to AI, not only in terms of the data that's being used, but also where that data is sent for analysis?
Yeah, and I think, Ross, the key word you just said there was control, right? And obviously, as a CISO, I want to make sure that I understand, where data is going and who's accessing that, and I do like to control things, to be honest with you. But I have to understand that really what we're doing is we're creating bumpers, right? We're creating bumpers that people are going to operate against. And so, just some of the things that we talk about when we do that, right, is we talk about, again, it has to cover intellectual property, right? And so we're actually working on, I don't know if I'm gonna call it a policy, a bumper statement, but not a bumper sticker, but a bumper statement. It's going to cover, intellectual property, right? And then how are we going to handle when our IP that we didn't input into a model, in essence, shows up in the ether, right? How is that going to be maintained? And then I would say right now, straight away, is any policy that's created needs to basically say, look, if you have access to your company's trade secrets, the secret sauce, the other confidential information, I don't care if it is an individual tenant, if that information at this point does not go into any form of LLM, right? Until again, some of these, your poll there just said it all, right? Is that we're still in the learning phase, right? We're not running forward at a brick wall at 100 miles an hour, right? We see that brick wall and we know it's there and we're moving steadily towards it in a very responsible manner. But yeah, I think just keeping our heads about us is probably the biggest challenge during this type of a rush. You know, our CTO said during our presentation 2 weeks ago, this is not the Beatles. Okay.
Yeah, I can. Sorry, go ahead, please.
No, I was just saying that it's not the Beatles. It's not Elvis Presley, right? And so, yeah.
Well, I think your CEO sounds like a wise man, and I'm getting the cue to wrap this segment, but I want to slide in one more quick question because this, as you know, Spotlight on Security is all things about security. So, changing gears just a little bit, we all know about the 3-2-1 backup rule. And I understand tied to that you're now embracing cyber vaulting as a service. And I'm curious why you think cyber vaulting makes sense for your business.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say I was resistant to it at first, but I kind of looked at what we had in place from a data protection strategy, and I said, and not even that it's good enough. I said, you know what, this is a really good strategy, right? But then, when I was kind of introduced to the concept of cyber vaulting and we started to walk down that, one of the things I love about this, and I think the official term is quorum, right? But basically all of that means is that I'm the CISO, okay? But when I put my data into a cyber vault, when I put my financial data, when I put my other, the crown jewels in essence into a cyber vault, I can't restore that. I can't authorize that, right? It takes, it combines technology, it combines process, and really incorporates, not to use air gap, because I think everybody says air gap, but it is truly an air gap solution, but it's air gapped for people as well. And so if I'm physically compromised, right, is it's going to take, multiple members of my team in order to restore that data back, and there's obviously things, there's, the immutability, there's object lock, there's a lot of things that are reasons to utilize that. But for me, that's the biggest one, is it's just another feather in the cap in essence from a data protection strategy. And then honestly, once we looked at the cost versus the risk of not doing it, it was really kind of a no-brainer for us.
Yeah, and it's, the question becomes why not do it versus why do it. So I think that makes a lot of sense. Michael, I know that we've got some questions that we want to get to, but so I want to make sure we get to those. But before we do that, I'd like to introduce our final guest who is going to be joining us live for this final segment, our third segment. And with that, I'm thrilled to welcome Matt Waxman to the program. Matt is Chief Solutions Officer at Cohesity. His team of field CISOs frequently consults with organizations to help build their cyber resilience and recovery strategy. Great to have you back on Spotlight, Matt.
Hey, Ross, it's great to be back on. Hey, Michael.
Matt, good to see you.
Likewise.
All right, so as I previously mentioned, our third segment is our Q&A segment, and we've got a number of questions and comments from the audience. In fact, let me check my chat once again real quick. All right, let's dive in. So this first, we're getting comments and questions around this notion of control. Matt, we heard Michael talking a little bit about the importance of that and having control when embracing generative AI. Matt, curious if you have anything that you'd like to add to that conversation.
Yeah, I think it's been a really fascinating discussion listening to Daniel and Dimitri and Michael. The past 7 months, we are all witnessing both the same time things happening as we're learning, which is a pretty unique time. I saw a recent poll that 2 out of every 3 people in the US are actually scared of AI. And it's understandable. It's a double-edged sword, right? On one hand, the threat is that AI makes it easier for cyber criminals to actually go and create malware or exploit vulnerabilities, maybe even write insecure code. But on the other hand, AI can be really powerful. It can help you combat the cyber criminals. For example, if you talk to anyone that's running a security operations center, they're just bombarded with information and alerts and so on and so forth. AI is a great tool there, right? To be able to take the signal and remove all the noise out of it. So I don't think AI is going to replace any sound security strategy or good controls, to Michael's point, or training your people. So we should all lean in, and make sure that we're thinking about our security strategy at the same time, that we're staying informed of how we can actually leverage these capabilities. And I think Michael touched on that point earlier. It is an opportunity for all of us to learn and actually drive some improved efficiencies too.
Yeah, it's a great point, Matt. I feel like everybody had heard of AI, of course, but I feel like when we start seeing segments around, like on 60 Minutes, where they're talking for 15 minutes on the power and the risks of generative AI, it has definitely moved into a mainstream consumer level conversation. So great points there. So our next question has to do with policy. Michael, you mentioned something about policy in your previous answer. The question is, do you have at HKS a policy on AI?
Yeah, we have a policy that we're going to create a policy, but no, we are in process of creating that. Again, we're learning where those bumpers are. I think if it was an organization that just dealt in data in essence, and we didn't have a design component, a creative component to that, I think we probably, honestly would have probably, shut it down a lot sooner, and until we understand, some of the rewards that Matt talked about. But I think we're seeing a lot of those rewards, right? We're seeing, time from thought to execution is drastically reduced. I mean, tools like Midjourney and DALL-E and things that are far more creative than I, but where in fact I was reading an article. There's a camera actually now that doesn't have a lens, and you can in essence put in a location, and it uses an open weather API, and it generates a photo of the location that you've asked it to generate, right? And it probably takes a lot better pictures than I ever could. And so you start looking at things like that, right? And that really opens up the kind of the art of the possible to people. And so we just don't want to shut that portal down. And again, just, so the quick answer to the question is we do not have one. We will be coming up with one very shortly. That's one of the guidances that the team is going to be working on. But when we do, we're going to make sure that it enables people to, again, use this from a creative process and not stymie that innovation.
Yeah, and Michael, I know that you said before that you can see where the answer in our poll, where that was hitting home with you today as well, which sounds very much in line with, I'm sure there's many companies out there that are right now in the process of creating an AI policy. So it makes a lot of sense. This next question is really around the notion of responsible AI. We're hearing a lot of companies talking about responsible AI. I know Google is also talking about it. I would love to hear more from actually both of you on what you think that this notion of responsible AI means. And maybe, Matt, for that, I'll start with you for this question, and then Michael, we'll go to you next.
Yeah, I think, Daniel and Dimitri touched on this quite a bit, and I really appreciated their perspective on this. Look, training an LLM requires a huge amount of data. And so there's this tension between what data do you provide the model? And, today's world, we see all the talk about ChatGPTs and OpenAI, which are really using public information. But when you're now applying this to your business, like Dimitri shared inside of BigID as a company, it's your data. Right. So I think responsible AI is very much a set of principles to think about. How do you ensure that the right data is being shared with a model? How do you also equally ensure that the output that's coming from a model is going to the right people? In a lot of ways, you can think about the controls that have been in place around role-based access. Those have been there forever. You need to apply those same principles and techniques against the data in your LLM and the output from that as well. So it's really about respecting role, understanding privacy, ensuring that both the data used to train the model and output from it is used appropriately.
Great perspectives. And Michael, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, I think, I'd be remiss as our firm recently announced that we've achieved carbon neutrality, and so that's really been an important milestone for us as a firm that really focuses on sustainability, right? Well, if you go look at the metrics and behind what, from a sustainability perspective, that it's taken to achieve some of these leaps and the more drastic and dramatic AI instances, I mean, it's honestly a little appalling. And I think one of the things we have to do is we have to even look at that from a sustainability perspective, right? Is that, look, what is the cost of being able to generate and harness this level of data, right? And what is the cost to things like carbon footprints and where are we using the computational power where we could be using it for other things, right? Are we still using it for medical advancements and reducing food waste? I mean, the things that are very, very important from an industry perspective that most of this computational power has been directed towards. And so now we're going to direct it toward, answering my question to help me write my term paper. So I just think, it takes, it's more than just technology, right? And so it takes all kinds to get into that conversation.
Yeah, there was an interesting conversation on NPR about term papers. There was a professor that was finding that he was able to utilize AI programs to determine which term papers had been written by AI programs. So it's really continuing on there. Question from Tony Gibbons, and Matt, I'm going to direct this one to you, and I'll repeat it. Should there be a line drawn between artificial intelligence and machine learning? Should there be a line drawn between artificial intelligence and machine learning? Some would argue that ML is part of AI, but I would welcome any thoughts that you have on that, Matt.
I mean, not to be cheeky, but generally you see it as AI/ML. So there is technically a line there. But yeah, I think, look, I think, Michael, you said it, 70 years AI has been around. This isn't a new space. I remember earlier in my career when I was studying computer science, I was learning AI using Lisp programming language. So there are many disciplines here. I think that as a term, AI is sort of all encompassing, but it is important when you get down to understanding the technologies and what can help you where to understand the difference for some people between deep learning and machine learning and generative AI and so forth. So I think collectively we can all do a bit of a better job there. Got it.
And last but not least, I'm getting the cue to wrap, but I'm going to slide one more question in. And I think, Matt, I'll also direct this one for you. Have you heard about cyber attacks where the suspected culprit was AI?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. I know we probably don't have too much time left, but I'll share this. I think that if any of you were to try, and people have tried, to go to a platform like ChatGPT or OpenAI and ask to create malware or phishing emails or so forth, they're filtering those things out. But that doesn't prevent, the smart folks from finding ways around that. So inevitably, there will be instances of that. I think the thing that we have to think of collectively is there are the public models and there are the private models. What happens when, the cyber criminals start to deploy their own? And that's why I think collectively as an industry, we all have to stay up to date, ahead, deploy best practices. And I love Michael's have a committee, right? Have people that are thinking about how to take advantage of the capabilities that are coming out of this space so quickly. So that's my short answer to it, Ross.
All right. No, I appreciate your 60-second response there, Matt. Thank you. And look, thank you, Michael and Matt, for joining us on Spotlight. Always great to get your perspectives. Thanks again for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And with that, we're going to close. Thank you all for joining us on this episode of Spotlight. Your participation and input always makes all the difference. As usual, there is a survey coming your way. Please tell us your thoughts about Spotlight and what topics that you would like to see on a future episode. Thanks in advance for your input and your opinions. And in the meantime, keep an eye out for our next Spotlight on Security episode. And until then, stay safe and secure. Thank you for joining us.